Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and in today's podcast, we will be discussing the challenge of transforming infrastructure performance through accelerating our use of data. Now, it's a concept that was first tabled by the UK government's Infrastructure and Projects Authority, but one that is now, without question, top of mind for every cash-strapped public and private asset owner and operator looking to close the gap between outcome aspiration and the resource reality they face. As I've reflected before, the future of our built environment depends on doing more with less, but also on achieving better economic and social outcomes. The pressure to create more sustainable solutions is growing as legally binding net zero emissions targets bear down, and the need to protect our natural environment really does start to grow. So to achieve these goals, it's clear that the global infrastructure sector must radically shift its thinking and in particular ramp investment in digitalisation to embrace the power of new data analysis technologies such as artificial intelligence and to accelerate towards the vital change that's required. So to discuss this complex challenge, I'm joined today by Meredith Hodgman, Policy Lead for the Internet of Things Alliance in Australia. Meredith joined me recently in Singapore at the 2023 Transforming Infrastructure Performance Summit hosted by Bentley Systems, where she chaired the event and provided great insight and wisdom into the power of digitalisation. So great to see you again, Meredith. Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Anthony.
Well, let's start by talking about this event in Singapore. It's the third TIP summit that Bentley's hosted, the first being in London last November, which was repeated in Birmingham in April this year. But this latest event is the first time the TIP message has been taken abroad. So why is Singapore a great place to discuss this important topic?
Singapore was the perfect place to hold the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Summit. Long been hailed as the heartland of ASEAN, a really clear long-term strategic vision of 50 years and a lot of certainty for investors. World famous for smart cities, a really clear citizen-centric approach to digitalisation, and most importantly, a central approach to governance across a lot of their departments for rolling out major transformation.
Great. It's also one part of the world where it's really embraced the use of building information modelling, BIM, and the use of data across the whole asset life cycle. And of course, they've got this fantastic 50-year infrastructure strategy as well. So, what are we learning from this part of the world?
That question actually came up at the conference, and the answer that the stage presented was, in particular, how Singapore is putting environment and climate and green cities at the heart of everything. And I think that's a really clear visual message that any visitor to Singapore can take away. But I'd encourage us to go a little bit further and really have a look at the way the governance of their machinery of government enables such genuine reform quite efficiently and with a respectful amount of cost by actually having a centralised approach and a really clear long-term plan. All of the government departments are encouraged to swim together up the river as opposed to swimming against each other.
That's a great phrase. I like that. Your background is in driving sustainability and livability into the design of cities, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But most recently, you became enmeshed in digitalisation, in data, in the world of really connected devices and the Internet of Things. Why would you say that embracing digital systems is so important for the transformation of infrastructure performance, and in particular, the health of our cities?
I think one of the best ways to illustrate that is how I actually came to work in this space. When we started working in green buildings and corporate social responsibility and, environment more broadly 15, 20 years ago, we were often accused of doing things like greenwashing. A lot of programs and projects would be put up. It was really hard to make a business case internally to get approval across the board. But once we actually were able to collect the data and show not just the benefit that we could provide, but how we would measure our own performance, suddenly it became very clear that the reforms that were being proposed would actually make a real difference to the bottom line as well as the environment.
So, and that's a really important part of it. You've got to have a really strong economic reason as well as that social reason.
So it started out, for me at least, as the desperate need to be able to prove the importance of the programs. But now more broadly, I think we're seeing a really strong uptake of governments around the world, understanding that by using data, they can actually better respond to their citizens and their stakeholders and really meet their political agendas and collaborate more broadly to uplift their economies, place-based economic development, but really regional economic development as well.
Well, you're a great person to talk to about the needs of government, because in your career you've worked across all levels of government in Australia. Well, nearly all of them. There's quite a few, as far as I know. You've worked at city level in Sydney, at State Department level in Melbourne, and at federal government level with the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. Apart from the fact that it's really difficult, what's this experience taught you about routes to creating the change that's needed?
I'd suggest 2 key lessons, actually, Anthony. The first is the importance of using all the tools that you can get to understand and to define the problems that we're facing, whether that be stakeholder engagement or real-time asset information. You need to really make sure that you're starting in the right place, and then to keep using best practice to solve and communicate across the departments. I say best practice because people often think of technology as whiz-bang widgets or clunky, long-term, expensive platforms. But the reality is that when you go to the dentist, you expect your dentist to use the very best cutting-edge tools at their disposal to ensure quality and efficacy. And it really should be no different of government. Citizens, as the main shareholders in enterprise that is government, or the users of the place, have the right to expect and to trust that governments will do their best to know and understand what the future holds, and then to deploy sensible, meaningful tools to their employees across the board to help them to collaborate. The second key lesson I'd say from all of those different government roles you've listed off for me there is that government really cannot do it alone, and nor should they. Industry is the leading expert in technology, not government. The foresight and technical expertise required to manage and understand what is on the horizon for our homes and for our communities and for our transport and broader major infrastructure projects can't feasibly be done alone. There is no one right path forward, though, and to determine the courses of action, a balance of modern bureaucracy, political vision and leadership across industry partnerships is essential. I really do think it's up to governments to collaborate together across localities, especially at the federal level like here in Singapore, and really define that problem and then get the conditions right for industry to be able to innovate in that partnership.
I like the way you referred to working with government a bit like pulling teeth, dentistry. It's that painful, is it?
The sausage machine. Sometimes don't ask what happens behind closed doors.
Well, let's build on those themes there, and let's talk through some of the key themes around transforming infrastructure performance that came through in the summit. The first one, it was around leadership. Why is strong leadership so important to you when it comes to driving change and really getting these really complex issues mobilized by government clients?
I'd love to paraphrase Nick Smallwood, actually, in the way he summed up the day. He was speaking not on behalf of his organisation at the time, but really...
This is Nick Smallwood, the Chief Executive of the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, yeah.
Yes, but rather than speaking on behalf of the authority in that instance, he was really summarising the sentiment in the room. And he said, we want to invest in people. We want net zero outcomes and we want market to be more profitable. So to your question about leadership, I think that's really important way to summarise it, because to invest in the people is definitely something that can't be taken lightly. Massive time cost, massive financial cost. And importantly, the investment really needs to match the strategic goals of the enterprise, no matter what. For me, that was really key. And it was really wonderful to actually hear us unpick it and go deeply and start to really look at the subsectors that we might need to focus those training and skills into. I think normally when we talk about leadership in the smart infrastructure space, certainly from a government perspective, it's having the clarity and the vision to take a leap of faith, to have a long-term vision and to make a commitment that's beyond the electoral cycle, and to tackle the projects and the problems that will quite often utilise data. And unfortunately, with the wonders of data come the terror of privacy, which quite often for some leaders can be a battle that they don't wish to face.
Right, yeah.
If we can thank COVID for anything, it's that now people are a little bit more comfortable with sharing their data and digitalisation more broadly. But realistically, we still need to have a really thoughtful, concerted and pragmatic approach to trust and data sovereignty.
Okay. One of the key issues that we keep returning to in these summits is how to learn from our mistakes, but also how to learn from our successes. But there's very interesting sessions on the progress that Crossrail in London has been handing over to the Cross River rail project in Brisbane. Why is it so hard? Why is it so hard for us to learn those lessons?
Again, I'm speaking from a government perspective, but we always talk about in Australia the Sydney Morning Herald test. No bureaucrat in their right mind would like to end up on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald, nor would they want their minister to. So the goal is always really to do anything that will amplify the positive messages and hide anything that might be perceived as negative, including a lesson learned in some instances. That's a big one. That's an obvious one, to be honest. We had a room full of such high caliber of experts that we could go straight into the nitty-gritty. And one of my favorite topics came up very quickly, and that was the importance of use cases. Use cases aren't really case studies. They're not really marketing material. They provide granular detail into ROI for the investment of the project itself. How much money are you actually saving? They provide granular detail about how much cost, speed or efficiencies or whatever the solution is delivering, and real world applications and uses for both the employees and for the people in a manner that's probably a little bit, dare I say, unsexy and not the kind of thing that you would have a glossy in. But the Cross River Rail project came up yesterday. And so we had this wonderful presentation, which came up like a case study, but really was more of a use case. And they lifted the lid and showed the internal workings on a whole lot of questions that I think a lot of people would really love to know. The case study was really good because Cross River Rail pointed directly at Crossrail and said that because they had actually shared the details at the right time and had an honest conversation with them, they were really able to apply those learnings. I loved this case study for a couple of reasons. First of all, he pointed to the serendipity and the importance of actually speaking to people and connecting with people in your own industry and getting together to have these types of Chatham House conversations. And
so there was a very strong relationship between Malcolm at Crossrail and Russ at Cross River Rail.
Indeed. You could really sense the joy that he'd had from having the opportunity to learn.
There's a father and son kind of relationship going on there, yeah.
It was. And it's all about the timing. So that was a real win.
Okay. I mean, would you say that, that those kind of case studies, therefore, are the best way to spread this best practice? Or is it? It's you can write these things down, but ultimately you've got to have the people that share that knowledge.
Look, I do honestly think that training and capability programs, in and of themselves, inside governments, are really important platforms for learning, particularly when they bring together different departments. They create a space for people to get to know each other that otherwise may not know. I mean, in the New South Wales Department of Transport, there are 50,000 people. You literally can't know everybody. It's not physically possible. So we have to remember that the heart of all this change are humans. Use cases are really going to be important for a very long time, particularly with technology, because use cases will equip those employees, even if they don't have a very strong digital understanding, to mount the business case internally. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's hard to even prove that you have a problem before you can even get the authority or the approval to go out for procurement. And that lead time, that business development, that thought leadership is a cost that the private sector is really wearing at the moment. So it's really good to see the tools rolling out that we need.
Right, yeah. And also the way that the people are really involved in that whole process as well. We also spoke a lot about digital disruption, and we hear a lot today about the pressing need for this these new tools that are going to create this disruption. In particular, the need to get to grips with things like AI, but also I think the data strategies that sit behind those tools. How do we approach this? What's your advice for approaching this?
Well, if you want to digitalize and you think that you're collecting data and you don't have a data strategy, and in particular a data reuse strategy, you're leaving value on the table, particularly around climate change and climate adaptation. And there are some very strong benefits to reusing the data that you have in terms of environmental savings, but also cost savings. So when we talk about the types of tools that are available on the market at the moment, particularly around digital twins or other type of simulation or immersive technologies, they're so data intense that you don't always need to keep collecting that all of the time. Not a lot of people actually make use of the data they have. Thinking about the scalability and the possibility of scalability for the client when a product is available to them to actually be able to do less with more, obviously. Mm-hmm. So one case study was put forward where I think it might have been the IPA. They were building a suite of infrastructure projects. I'm going to say they were schools. All of them were to be identical.
Yeah, so, there were schools and there's a prison program as well.
There's a prison program. Design once, build 3 times. You can do that when you reuse your data.
Yeah. The other thing which we discussed when it came to strategies around the use of data data, is to actually think about it from the very first moment of the project. I mean, one of the issues we talked about with Crossrail was the fact that they created a lot of data and they didn't actually pass it down through to the operation and maintenance part of the project for various different reasons. Probably a lot of them sensible, I don't know. But that is, I think it came out as a clear issue around making sure you've got that strategy that flows through the entire life cycle of the asset. Is that hard to do?
It definitely can be. I think most of my background's in place-based smart infrastructure, which might sound like a trivial detail, but when you're building a train line, you're physically and logistically up track and down track, in addition to upstream and downstream in your supply chain. When you have a place-based asset or a place-based infrastructure project, people often get together in the same room specifically because that's where everybody's co-located. A number of different challenges around that, but I think at the end of the day, thinking outside the square and not just working within your own silo and about what your own data needs are is the key here. Who might have needed what you have beforehand? Who could benefit from what you have tomorrow? How will the information that you're dealing with today on your desk actually impact the future?
Yeah, and I suppose also how you're going to actually have a strategy for making sure it's up to date. And if you're creating the single source of truth, it is the truth at that particular moment in time.
Yeah, I think understanding the difference between static data and data that can help you move into the realm of forecasting and horizon planning is a whole new conversation, actually.
There was a lot of talk about AI. And I know it's not entirely in your kind of remit, but where are you? Should we fear it? Is it something that we should be wary of or we should embrace?
I'm in the embrace camp, Anthony. I think I would be a hypocrite if I didn't. We often think and talk about data sovereignty and the citizens' right to their own data and who owns it in my sphere. And I think this will be a little bit of a stretch, so bear with me here, but think about our relationship with the nation state and the Treaty of Westphalia. We signed away our rights to that eons ago, but we still trust in our governments today to varying degrees, depending on your market. Data, unfortunately, for us is a little bit similar. Most of us have already signed the deed and given away so much of our privacy, it's not funny. So I think that rather than worrying about future technologies seriously impinging on us, the really big one thing that anyone can do is actually start reading the dotted lines on what they've already signed or what they're about to sign today.
Good Lord, that's a big ask, that is. Meredith, let's talk about what you actually do. You're based in Sydney, policy lead at the Internet of Things Alliance in Australia. I mean, what is it all about? What is the IOTAA? What do you do? And how does it help?
The Internet of Things Alliance Australia is a peak industry body. We represent over 500 different IoT businesses in Australia.
A peak body?
Yeah, a member body represents and advocates for the interests of its members only. Right. A peak body represents and advocates for the interest of the entire industry and the entire sector, whether or not you're a member or not. Right. So basically what we're trying to do is work in partnership with, in many instances, the government, but also unify industry around the challenges that it's facing, particularly in the case of, for us at the moment, our priorities are very much around the update and advent of new regulation. So if a government wants to change a regulation because they are worried about AI, how do we as a peak body then advocate for the best interest of our businesses and the needs of the market and ensure that the possibilities of digital transformation can be realised? Everybody talks about the promise of digitalisation, the promise of, the economic, environmental or social outcomes that may be realised, but sometimes the regulation isn't fit for purpose at the moment, or sometimes the new regulations that are proposed might actually impinge on our ability to dictate that.
So your role basically is to make sure that the policy that's coming out in Australia alone, or is it global?
We are a national body, yes.
Right, so it's the policy that's coming out in Australia is fit for purpose, is actually helping the industry and all the bodies you represent to drive forward that.
The industry, the bodies that we represent, but also the people. A large focus for us at the moment is on IoT for good. We recognise that IoT is the solution that essentially curates and collates all of the data that's required to drive a lot of the emerging technology.
So this is on the basic level. It's the connected devices such as your fridges, your cars, the domestic appliance, but then it goes beyond that to industrial applications.
It does. Industrial IoT also drops down a little bit further to Bluetooth. Bluetooth is an IoT device.
Oh, right.
Your telephone right here, right now. Yeah. Take a rough stab, Anthony. How many IoT devices are in your average smart car?
I don't know, but I do know how many smart devices I'm connected to, because a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, I was asked exactly that question by Gavin Elliott, who is at Mobile UK, and he's got a test on the website, and I'm connected to 14.
He has a test.
Yes,
That's
test.
creepy, isn't it?
It asked me how many I thought. It was 4, and it told me I was actually connected to 14. I know that I'm connected to about 20, though, because I missed out quite a few things. But yeah, you're right. We are all connected.
Incredibly.
To lots of things, yeah.
There can be up to and around 500
really?
sensors in one car alone.
Right. Is that good?
I think so. I love IoT. One of my favorite things about IoT is how safe it can be. It's essentially, if you have a one-way loop, it's machine-to-machine communication, but it doesn't double back, which makes it quite a secure tool. It does all sorts of really wonderful, humble things, like ensure the thermostat works in the air conditioning.
Right.
I couldn't live without it.
No. Well, I was about to say, my 1978 Land Rover doesn't have any, but that's not true, because it's got a Bluetooth radio. So there you go. I am very connected, even in 1978 technology. Anyway, Australia, though, are you leading the world in digitalisation then? Or are you following, how would you describe where Australia is at the moment?
We are sadly behind and dropping fast.
Oh, really?
Australia has amazing expertise in R&D. Sometimes I think of it like the petri dish end of the scale of innovation. We have a number of really large barriers to scaling those solutions in our market and to really advancing our knowledge economy. The biggest one is the size of our market. Amazing ideas are born and bred in our country through our wonderful university and academic system. And for those businesses to be able to grow, they often have to leave the country to get the access to capital, or to be able to co-locate with other innovation ecosystems, or just to have a bigger market.
Right. So that's why the IoT AA exists, presumably, to try to bring up everybody in Australia to a higher level.
It's definitely one of our priorities. Okay. It's also a strong focus of the Australian government.
What about yourself? Presumably you mentioned your car's connected, but have you got a smart door phone, a smartphone? Have you got a door app? Have you got health apps? How connected are you?
I am definitely a futurist. As much as I don't particularly love that word, and I relish and celebrate in all of my things, particularly my AirTags, actually. I don't think I could live without my AirTags. Oh, right. Everyone thinks I'm a bit crazy for it, but I will admit this. I recently moved house, and I moved into this smart house situation. And apparently you can't open your front door without the internet. So I've been there a little over a month technically, and it's still getting the better of me. Right. So
I've just realised I've got 2 iTags as well. I've got one on the dog.
You can't lose your most valuable possessions. You need to know where that is at all times. It
does warn me when the dog is too far away from me. It's very disturbing. Anyway, let's talk about sustainability and the ability of digitalisation to accelerate sustainability. How do you see infotech and the use of data helping us towards a lower carbon future?
Amelia Burnett's presentation from the Infrastructure Hub was definitely one of my favourite presentations. She did a remarkable job at presenting some incredibly curated data on the broader ecosystem of infotech as a whole. Quite a lot of envy of the power of their research going on there. I think one of the things that really stood out for me the most about what she showed us was after interviewing a number of governments involved in the G20, she was able to very clearly illustrate that there was a significant amount of funding from the governments and priority going into infotech with a very clear purpose of being able to directly meet the SDGs. And, that's a great message. It's really optimistic, but a little tiny part of me thought, well, that's also quite a risky message, because you can put a lot of money in there, but there are a lot of questions behind that. What happens if the money doesn't go to the right place? What happens if the money doesn't go to the training that's required, not instead of just the technology that's required? It really is still a high risk situation in terms of, putting all your eggs in one basket.
Okay. Well, how do you think you should, we all should start trying to persuade asset owners to really invest in this data that's going to take us through the whole asset life cycle and hopefully reduce the whole life cost and the whole life carbon cost.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the way that we are as an industry being able to provide better insights into the skills and capabilities of the innovative ideas that are out there. It's a really important priority to mobilise the private sector investment and to make sure that we're bringing solutions to market that could genuinely make an impact.
Okay. It's all about embracing change fundamentally. And we talked a lot about how to actually get this disruption, this change happening. But it's notoriously difficult in the infrastructure sector. It's very traditional. It's got low barriers to entry, and the margins, are not really high enough to allow investment quite often. How can you overcome this? How should we be overcoming this?
I can't answer that without pointing my finger at the green building industry a little bit. I think there's a recipe. I think we've seen great success in the green building industry is how they mobilise and actually use a variety of different standards and frameworks to radically and fundamentally modernise not just their industry, but the very important property market, really. So that's an example I always look at when we're designing programs and policies that are designed to fundamentally shape whole industries. I think for us and in the infrastructure space in particular, there really is an important need, especially if you're a government, to focus on the spillover effect of other leading industries. So, here I am saying Australia is not a leader in digitalisation, but actually we have amazing capabilities in mining and space and indeed cyber technology. So fostering and co-locating our fledgling businesses with other industries or universities, making sure we've got that bump factor with people is a really important thing. But at the end of the day, driving whole-scale industry change requires an industry with strong for-profit and for-purpose leaders, a cross-section of education and training and higher ed learning and government leadership.
I suppose the other thing to bear in mind is there's always a few early adopters and a few evangelists, and I'll probably put you in the category of evangelist, that are leading the way, but there's a huge rump of the industry across this global sector, which needs to be led down this path of digital enlightenment.
Absolutely. The big question of who's actually going to be responsible for measuring it and communicating the barriers is a really big job. And to shift that rump, I really think the biggest barrier or the most important priority ought to be shifting the cost of capability uplift out of the private sector. It really isn't the private sector's job to educate the government in absolutely everything, and the governments do need to take some ownership and invest in their people.
But this summit we had was supported by Bentley Systems, big software company. Have they got a particular role that you think they should be playing and driving harder with?
I love the way how Bentley Systems worked in partnership with the whole ecosystem and the whole industry, to be honest. I think that having these discussions and getting people in the room is a really important place to start. It's a real investment to do that. And I think that at the end of the day, it's an investment that not a lot of players in the ecosystem can do. SMEs, the innovators, the small businesses, they can't be doing this type of thing. So it's really nice to see a, quite honestly, very technology agnostic approach to leadership.
It's great to meet and hang out with somebody so passionate about this whole issue, and it's clearly enjoyed yourself at this summit.
Absolutely, Anthony, and the feeling's mutual.
Well, that's a great point to end on. Anyway, thanks very much. And I think there's going to be a full write-up of the Singapore event published soon, and of course, there's another TIP summit in London on the 27th of November where we can assess the progress that we're making once again. But for now, thanks very much for joining me on the Infrastructure Podcast.
It's been wonderful, Anthony, and I think it really speaks to the heart of the importance of leadership to be able to house all of this information in one place, to compare each year, year on year. The insights that's being gathered here are fantastic. So I really look forward to that report being put out by Bentley's own infrastructure policy team and Mark Coates.
Okay. Oh, we'll look out for that. I'll put a link to that on the website of show notes, certainly, so that you can get access to that. It will give you details of all the previous TIP events that have happened, plus the ones that are going to happen in the future. So thanks very much for joining me.
No worries.
Brilliant. Well, that's all we've got time for today, Meredith. We've got more, though. We've got more from the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline, more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. And if you haven't done so already, do visit the new Infrastructure Podcast website at www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information to all the things we talked about today, links to all these reports and past reports we put out about TIP, but also the latest podcast to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks again to Meredith. I look forward to seeing you all again very, very soon.